Thank you for taking the time to tune in to this throne speech featuring the Minister of Finance and myself. On Friday, November 6th, this government presented the 2020 speech from the throne, which detailed how, in its first legislative year, we will advance the agenda that earned overwhelming support at the polls. We will continue to invest in our young people. We will continue to protect our seniors and vulnerable, and we'll continue our focus on growing our economy and creating economic opportunity for Bermudians. I will provide an overview of throne speech initiatives and highlight our priorities and areas of focus. The Minister of Finance will also provide an overview of his ministry's initiatives. And during this week and next week, my ministerial colleagues will hold joint press conferences to detail the various initiatives that have been laid out in this throne speech. Last Tuesday, when I was here giving a coronavirus update, there was a question regarding the throne speech, and I stated that this speech would be considerably shorter than other throne speeches. That was deliberate, as these speeches are supposed to represent legislative matters that the government will advance in one session. Previously, throne speeches had grown to become very long, touching on all manners of policy and laying out detailed plans. And in my view, that is not what throne speeches are for. I wanted to ensure that the government was being realistic in laying out what we felt could actually be accomplished in a single legislative year. This year's throne speech theme was Rebuilding Bermuda with Bermudians at Heart. And that, of course, came from the Progressive Labour Party's election manifesto. And it communicates the basis and the foundation of all of the government's priorities. The fact is that the world post-pandemic will be vastly different than in the past, and our policies must recognize that rebuilding must happen, ensuring a more just, more fair, and more equitable society. The government not only believes that it's important to prepare Bermuda's youth for the future, but we must also value young people's current contributions to society. We will seek to engage young people and harness their energy, creativity, and passion about the causes that are most important to them by developing a national youth policy that supports and empowers this most critical segment of our community. It is no secret that Bermudians pay far too much for healthcare, and in the midst of a public health crisis, affordable universal health care is an unquestionable priority. To uncover and deliver innovative solutions, public and private sectors must unite to reduce Bermuda's healthcare expense and work to drive better healthcare outcomes. Therefore, as promised in our platform, in collaboration with Bermuda First, the government will introduce a Bermuda health plan focusing both on prevention as well as primary and community care, which we hope to reduce the reliance on expensive hospital care. Additionally, using technology, we will maximize efficiencies through an integrated healthcare model for Bermuda. To support our students and guided by a goal of establishing multiple pathways to success for Bermudian public school students, the government will complete the transformation of the public school system, collaboratively designing a system that phases out middle schools and returns Bermuda to a two-tier system. The new public school system will ensure students are equipped for vocational, academic, or business careers, as well as being able to succeed if they prefer independent entrepreneurial and artistic pursuits. As we focus on strengthening our economy and economic diversification during this session, the government will reform laws and policies to assist to develop an ecosystem and infrastructure that allows technology companies to base their operations in Bermuda. These new residents will enable the evolution of a tech community in Bermuda to complement the legacy industries that have provided the mainstay of the island's employment and revenue for decades. Having been incorporated in 1795, Hamilton has attracted legal, retail, dining, and banking entities, but has found it difficult to accommodate innovative business ideas or even, until relatively recently, residents. Accordingly, given our pursuit of digital companies inside of the digital economy, unused and underused sites in the city of Hamilton will be permitted to develop co-working spaces in which local and global entrepreneurs can live, work, and relax together while building our future. In addition, the legislature will be invited to support revisions to the existing long-term residential certificate policy to require those granted the right to live in Bermuda to make economic investments in the island or to invest in the new Bermuda Trust Fund, which will be set up to benefit those who have not had the benefit of historic inherited wealth. Additionally, the government will advance the next chapter of comprehensive immigration reform by legislating a framework for the grant of permanent residency in Bermuda. A bill to create a police authority will be introduced to facilitate an open and collaborative forum to support the Bermuda Police Service and the communities they serve, while the Ministry of National Security will advance the National Crime Prevention Plan, focusing on prevention, rehabilitation, and reintegration. In our ongoing efforts to support hardworking Bermudians, especially those whose employment has been impacted during the pandemic, the legislature will take under consideration the final aspects of wage reform in support of Bermuda's workers to establish a statutory living wage. With reference to the Digital Bank Initiative, Bermuda prides itself as a well-regulated place to do business with a respected regulatory and legal system. This has been key to Bermuda's success in attracting international business. We understand that there are potential risks to this reputation if something were to go wrong with any of the new businesses attracted in by Bermuda's fintech strategy. Therefore, the continued regulation of digital asset businesses effectively is a high priority. Before the digital bank bill is advanced, the required level of due diligence will be conducted. And to that end, the government will work with industry experts to build out a detailed business plan with the objective of developing the digital bank for Bermuda. At a high level, the business plan will create intellectual property for the world's first state-sponsored digital bank, to review current regulatory standards and describe potential areas where additions may be required to ensure applicability and the effective functioning of the new bank, propose new standards and identify corresponding banking partners, identify key risks in establishing the bank and propose risk mitigation strategies, and advise on the design of the core technology. We believe that the size of our relevant financial sectors and high regulatory standards make us an attractive jurisdiction for this proposal, and we anticipate the development of the digital bank in Bermuda will assist in Bermuda's desire to be a leading location not only for fintech firms, but for companies that are looking for friendly jurisdictions that have complementary services to allow digital businesses to expand and to grow. As I said, my ministerial colleagues and I have an ambitious agenda, and there is a lot of work to be done. We will continue to focus on economic growth and what our island requires in order to make sure that we build the Bermuda economy for Bermudians. And now I will hand it over to the Minister of Finance, who is responsible for the economic management, to detail the initiatives in the throne speech. Minister.
Thank you, Premier. Good afternoon. This past Friday, the Bermuda government set out our legislative agenda, which continues our plan to deliver a better and fairer Bermuda in keeping with our 2020 general election platform. The main areas of focus of my remarks today will be the Ministry of Finance throne speech initiatives. At the end of my remarks, I will give an update on the Fairmount Southampton redundancies. I will begin with the reform of banking laws to assist with the harmonization of the Bermuda base rate charged by local banks. Interest rate benchmarks are a useful basis for all kinds of financial contracts, such as mortgages, bank overdrafts, and other more complex financial transactions. In fact, most developed countries have some form of a base rate that is used by financial institutions in that country to price their own loans. One of the challenges I have found as the Minister of Finance is that there is very little transparency or clarity around how our local banks set rates or even their base rates, as each bank seems to have its own rate, with some having different commercial and retail rates. In order to bring clarity and greater transparency to the setting of lending rates, I intend to introduce legislation that will require Bermuda banks to use the U.S. prime rate as their base rate. Bermuda banks will be required to set rates on loan products such as mortgages and auto loans based on the U.S. prime rate, and customers will be able to easily compare rates from various banks before making a borrowing decision. Once this legislation has passed through the legislature, it will apply to new products purchased and sold after the commencement date of the legislation. I would now like to discuss our plans to assist families in their home ownership aspirations. Owning a home has given Bermudians a tangible stake in their country, something to protect and defend. Promoting home ownership will therefore contribute significantly to the ongoing creation of an ownership culture. To assist with this objective, the throne speech announced that government will introduce further pension reform to allow for the use of a portion of pension account balances to help to fund the down payment on the purchase of a home by first-time homebuyers. Since 2010, amendments to the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Act of 1998 and regulations have allowed plan members in employer plans or individual local retirement products to be able to make hardship withdrawals, receive the entire balance of their pension fund if $50,000 or below at retirement, as well as for others reaching the age of 65 to be able to receive 25% of their pension fund balances at retirement. Furthermore, as a result of the recent COVID-19 pandemic, further amendments to the Act now permit a one-time refund of up to $12,000 up to the 30th of June of 2021, that may be received by a plan member of a defined contribution plan or local retirement product if they are under the normal retirement age, normally 65. The government has also introduced legislation to permit the full suspension of plan contributions, 5%, by both plan members and employers up to the 30th of June 2021. To progress this throne speech initiative, I can confirm that the Ministry of Finance has already requested that the Pension Commission undertake research and make recommendations to the ministry on permitting plan members who are first-time homebuyers to be able to borrow a certain percentage of the value of their pension fund balances to purchase a home. Research has revealed that a number of other jurisdictions permit loans or pension assets to be used as collateral or security against loans taken out with financial institutions such as banks. The government is mindful of the long-term implications on a plan member's retirement income in permitting such withdrawals. However, this must be balanced against the critical and urgent need in our community. On Friday, it was mentioned that during this session, the House of Assembly will be invited to approve additional capital development spending to stimulate Bermuda's economy. Capital projects will be advanced to keep people employed while refreshing our infrastructure. A revised capital development plan will be produced, setting out targeted project expenditures using a portion of the proceeds of the government's recent debt raise to keep Bermudians working while our economy recovers from the economic shock of the coronavirus pandemic. I can confirm that the government's Capital Expenditure Plan Technical Committee, which has been meeting to expedite public sector capital investment focusing on construction projects, has come up with a tentative government capital expenditure stimulus plan of just over $11 million so far. There are approximately 40 projects in the stimulus plan, with a number slated to begin imminently. Further information on the government's capital expenditure stimulus plan will be provided by the Ministry of Public Works. The public will recall that in October 2017, the government established the Tax Reform Commission by way of the Tax Reform Commission Act of 2017. The mission of the Tax Reform Commission was to examine Bermuda's tax system for the purpose of determining any measures that may be taken to best enable a system of taxation and revenue collection that is equitable, effective, efficient, competitive, and transparent, and to prepare and submit its report and recommendations to the Minister of Finance. The Tax Reform Commission report was made available to the government in October of 2018 and included several recommendations. The government considered all of the recommendations in the TRC's report and introduced some of their proposals in our 2019-2020 budget. As mentioned in last Friday's throne speech, the ministry will provide the legislative authority and a revised terms of reference for the Tax Reform Commission to update their recommendations made in 2018 that will reflect our current economic circumstances. The government will closely evaluate and consider all recommendations included in any updated Tax Reform Commission report, and as per this government's normal custom and practice, the appropriate consultation with the various stakeholders will be conducted before any major changes are made to our tax system. In closing, I would like to speak on the redundancies at Fairmount Southampton Hotel. These redundancies have had a searing impact on the workers and the people of Bermuda generally. The Bermuda government supported the redevelopment plan put forward by hotel owners GenCom in December 2019 when they purchased the hotel. At that time, it was clear that the hotel would need to be closed for extensive renovations. Additionally, it was known that redundancy payments would need to be paid to the hotel workers, many of whom have spent their entire working lives on the premises, making the tourism industry that we all rely on successful. What no one foresaw was the interruption to the 2020 tourist season brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. All Bermuda hotels, and indeed hotels worldwide, have seen their businesses closed, temporarily or otherwise, and their workers without an ability to support their families. It has been hard on everyone, but especially hard on those in our hotels and restaurants who rely heavily on gratuities to earn a living. However, the challenging operating environment does not remove the obligation of the hotel owners to make payments to employees as they elected to make staff redundant. The Bermuda government, through the Ministries of Finance and Labor, have been engaged with stakeholders to ensure that the hotel owners meet their obligations to the workers. It is clear that having missed the October 23rd payment deadline, these payments are in doubt. It is unacceptable to leave the workers in the dark until November 20th, as most, if not all, have financial obligations to meet today. Therefore, the Bermuda government has put into action a plan to pay the workers directly through a program designed to see workers paid as soon as this week. These payments will be in the form of loans to employees equal to amounts due to them in redundancy, which will require repayment once sums are paid by GenCom. We will also take steps to ensure that the continuing obligations for payments to employees are given appropriate priority by GenCom. The workers and management at Fairmount Southampton have done everything to bring this difficult phase of the hotel closure to a sensible conclusion, and we appreciate and recognize their efforts. These are challenging times. We must take extra care of those in our community made vulnerable by the continuing economic downturn. The people of Bermuda have elected this government to act on their behalf, and we will continue to be steadfast in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from members of the media? Don't all come first. Here you are.
Okay. Thank you for having us, folks.
I guess, Mike, I've got 5 questions that I'll be directing at either of yourselves who might be able to answer on it. The first one, you had a story you may have noticed this morning to do with the constitutional reforms that came up in the throne speech. There were a few sentences on that. We wanted to know, I mean, are we talking about giving the island more scope for control of its own affairs in terms of negotiating with other countries, or reducing the type of mandatory legislation that might not be welcome to do with beneficial ownership or economic substance? Just really, if you could expand on that, would be great.
Happy to do so. There certainly was a lot of speculation in today's daily. And I think that what most persons should do, if there's the specific issues when it comes to constitutional reform, the Attorney General's title is Minister of Legal Affairs and Constitutional Reform, and she would be the best position to provide more detail on that when she holds her press conference, which may be later this week or early next week. But what I can say from the broader aspect of where it states inside of the throne speech is issues of which the government has faced when it's needed to do things that are external to Bermuda. A perfect example, the government of Bermuda had to wait 9 months before we got permission from the United Kingdom government to open an overseas office in Brussels, when we know that we're dealing with issues facing Brussels. Right now, we had to get permission for I think it is the Bermuda Shipping and Maritime Authority to open an office in Singapore where we're needing these business decisions. The fact is that there are models of our constitutional construct which are outdated. The government, the United Kingdom government, said that we were going to offer all overseas territories the ability to make suggestions for updates to their constitutional models. There are other things that are inside of there, such as recommendations that have been for a while about a judicial services legal committee and other matters. There have not been any significant updates to Bermuda's constitution since 2003. And so this is an ideal time and opportunity to make those changes. And so from that aspect, I know that everyone wants to read into these things far more than they need to. But from this particular aspect, this is formed from the challenges of which have been experienced by the government inside of these interactions, and noting that for the ability to execute things swiftly, especially when dealing with international partners, always waiting for the United Kingdom's government's permission, which sometimes is not a quick process, is probably not in the best interest of moving quickly when it comes to dealing on international matters.
Thanks, sir. The number two one I had, just look at the motor car legislation. There's talk of deregulation to open up and boost business. Can you, again, it might be reading into it, but are we talking about things such as Uber type services potentially coming? Is it related to the hitch service?
Oh, that's a rather provocative question, Jonathan Bell. My goodness.
It was a short little piece that we were curious about.
No problem. I'm quite certain that, as I come to know in practice, that the Royal Gazette likes to take its story from its comments. So I would not be unsurprised in any way, shape, or form that RG commenters would be commenting on that particular company. I declare my interest, as everyone knows, that I co-founded that company called Hitch, so don't need to speak about that. But I think it's a more broad level. And the broad level is that one of the challenges of which we have when it comes to reform of the public service vehicle license industry is the fact that it has been built over different times. So you have instances where you have minibuses whose fees are $5,000. You have taxis whose fees are $100,000. You have different varied things, and those actually cause a lot of challenges when it comes to the, I would say, deregulation, but simplifying the regulation of which exists. If you look at the public service vehicle legislation, I mean, we're looking at legislation which is 40 years old, and a lot of legislation in Bermuda has been developed in the Motor Car Act itself, which is, from 1951. Significant updates from taxi legislation, I can't necessarily state, possibly a little later. In saying that, if we're going to move to a place where we're going to be more embracive of new technologies, whatever those technologies are, we have to deal with the base challenges. And some of those base challenges are the differences in rates, the differences in allowances. And so in the view of the government, it makes more sense to move to less regulation inside the public service vehicle licensing space rather than more regulation inside the public service vehicle licensing space to allow there to be more competition, and to ultimately what we want to achieve is for better service to locals and better service to visitors. And I think that's the key crux and challenge in that aspect. So the Minister of Transport will certainly be giving a press conference later, and I'm sure he can cover that. But from the outset, the view is that we know that there are problems. And we've been talking about taxi problems, multiple governments talking about taxi problems and minibus problems and these problems and those problems. And the view of which I take is that less regulations can make these industries work better versus more regulation.
Thank you, sir. Moving along. Interesting there about the bringing in investment and long-term residency. Your government said in opposition that paying for citizenship or anything in that department was, I believe the term was, a red flag. Again, if you're able to elaborate somewhat, I know the Minister of Labor is the one who handles immigration, but remembering how contentious that was in the past, I guess what are we looking at people potentially paying into Bermuda, and what did they get back?
Well, I'm not entirely certain, and I did see those comments. Again, I'm just going to say that not surprisingly inflammatory, but I would say that it is possibly devoid from reality. So if we go back to 2016, and if we go back and we look at what happened with pathways to status and the challenges that we had with immigration reform, the opposition, Progressive Labour Party at that time was very clear. We believe there should be comprehensive and bipartisan immigration reform. And what this government has done is engage in a process of comprehensive and bipartisan immigration reform. We kept our promise in 2017 to form a bipartisan commission on immigration. We are going to keep that promise, which was renewed in this platform, to continue to advance those issues. We have passed matters dealing with repatriation and mixed status families, which are now in effect. The next stage of which we need to move to is insofar as permanent residency, which has been laid out inside of this throne speech. But what has been stated on the issue of residential certificates exist right now. But the Minister of Labor can expand on various issues and challenges with persons who have access to residential certificates, which are $263, by the way, on an annual basis, and making sure that we do as other countries do and tying those into possible additional investments if people want additional rights and privileges. So from that perspective, if people want to say that they are tying it to commercial immigration or putting various labels on it, that's their words. Our words are that we're going to act in the interest of which we feel is best for the country. And the Minister of Labor has determined that this is a construct that he wants to put in place. And I think the Minister of Labor will be happy to expand on that. But he has the full support of the government, as our job is to make sure that we address long-term challenges which have been unable to be advanced for so long. We have managed in a collaborative fashion to advance immigration reform. We have shown that we can do it in a non-rancorous fashion. We can do it in a way that you get bipartisan buy-in and that you get community buy-in. And we're going to continue to advance in that perspective. And I have no doubt that the Minister of Labor will be successful.
Thank you. And yeah, I don't go by what the commenters say with questions. I heard, interestingly, there was a mention in there about the living wage. What, in terms of the minimum wage, are we looking at that coming in this session? Have we ruled it out? Have we put it off down the line? Just, I heard living wage, but not the minimum wage.
The living wage and the minimum wage, I think, are tied together. I do not have the full view of the labor legislation off the top of my head, but what I do know is that for there to be a statutory establishment of a living and or minimum wage, I think it has to be passed through Parliament via affirmative resolution. So I think that is what the throne speech is referring to. The Minister of Labor will be able to elaborate further. I know from a meeting that the Minister of Finance, Minister of Labor, and myself were in earlier today with the Chamber of Commerce. The Minister of Labor had indicated that the report from the Wage Commission is expected by the end of the year. And in the budget session, we'll be advancing the recommendations to make sure that we move that policy to implementation.
Cool, sir. And just last one, we touched on health. We heard about the integrated healthcare model. Before, there was the talk of a single payer insurer, all of the insurance being pooled. Are we still looking at that model? Has it been tweaked? Are we still looking at the single payer model?
The model previously that was for the health plan that was advanced was certainly not a single payer model. Also, it would not be correct to say previously there was a single payer model because it was not. There was a view to have a full pool of all the insurance that currently takes place right now for the basic insurance inside of a single pool. But it was not to basically forbid other payers from existing inside of the system. So right now, of course, everyone has a standard level of insurance that is required, but those were not kept inside of one unified pool. And it was looked to have that unified pool and to expand that pool, to expand that level of coverage. I will let the Minister of Health speak more to the integrated healthcare model, but what I can say is that different times have changed. So we finished the consultation for the healthcare reforms, healthcare finance reform in October of 2019. The ministry was working on putting out the results of those consultations. And now, of course, you can understand the Ministry of Health's time has been consumed with the response to the coronavirus pandemic. The Minister of Health, I think, is scheduled to speak on those matters tomorrow during the regular coronavirus press conference when she'll be joined by me here. And I welcome you to pose those questions or for the Gazette to pose those questions at that time of our future, of our plan going forward. The one thing is that we have been collaborative in this approach. We were collaborative in the approach when we did healthcare finance reform. We have committed to continue to work with Bermuda First as making sure that we can continue the level of collaboration that is necessary. But one thing is clear. Everyone recognizes that we have to take long-term sustainable action for our healthcare reform and also long-term sustainable action on our economy. Those things go hand in hand, and I have no doubt that the Minister of Health will be able to advance those initiatives working in the collaborative fashion.
Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you. I hope someone has some questions for the Minister of Finance. It'll be Scott.
This is for the finance minister or the premier. I'm trying to get clarity on the plan to require long-term residents to monetarily contribute to the island. Would this apply henceforth or retroactively?
Happy to answer. The Minister of Labor will be the one, but I do believe that you can do things retroactively inside of legislation. So that'll be going forward.
So existing holders of long-term certificates could find that the cost of living here will go up a bit.
They could.
This is for the finance minister concerning the plan to allow first-time home buyers to use a portion of their pension to pay for the down payment of a house. What do you say to those who feel that allowing people to prematurely withdraw from their pension for non-emergencies is irresponsible and an act of self-harm?
I would say that you would have to listen to my words carefully. I said I didn't use the word withdraw. I used the word loan. There is a very well-established practice in the United States where persons who are participants in 401k plans are allowed to borrow from themselves to help to fund a down payment on a home. I know about this because I did it. And so what we're trying to do is demonstrated through my actions that I tend to be broadly consultative. And so any recommendation coming out of the Tax Reform Commission's updated work will be shared with key stakeholders to get feedback and try to understand the impacts. So there's nothing on the table, it's nothing off the table. It's kind of refreshing the work to kind of see how we can develop a better framework for our taxation in Bermuda.
Okay.
Scott, I should point out, as I pointed out prior to the session and in the meeting with the Chamber of Commerce earlier today, that there is nowhere in this throne speech that it says anything regarding capital gains taxes.
That's fine.
The only place where that was in the Royal Gazette headline.
Mm-hmm. And the Bermuda base interest rate that you talked about, I'm just curious about how you're going to achieve that. You have talked about some kind of legislation because I know it's kind of market driven here with the competition from the banks. And have you been consulting with the banks on this?
So I would say this, Scott, those folks who know me know that I believe I try to strive for as little regulation or intervention in the private markets, public markets as possible. So and folks will know that for the last, prior to starting this job, I spent 12 plus years working at a local bank, running a private banking business and a treasury business. So I understand the asymmetry that exists between those of us who are banking professionals and regular customers. And what we're intending to do here with this piece of legislation is to make it easier for people to kind of understand what they're paying and to be able to shop around across banks around pricing. Today, the three banks have different base rates, and each bank charges a premium or spread over the base rate. And so it's a bit more difficult for people to kind of understand how to compare these things. So what we're trying to do is setting a floor, which all banks will be obliged to use, and then they can charge on top of that as they see fit, depending on the credit quality of any particular situation. So we're trying to introduce some standards, some commonality in the pricing, at least the base pricing, and then banks will be free to choose how much they add to that for various products. It's a way, I think, of trying to help customers understand pricing better and being more transparent.
Okay. I just want to turn to the idea of this digital bank. Now, you said that's going to be state-sponsored. Who's actually going to run that, and who's going to be funding it?
Those are all things that are going to be fleshed out inside of the business plan. So I don't know if the Minister of Finance or myself are going to be running a bank.
Right.
But the fact is that there is a need for additional banking options. And the question is the urgency where we find ourselves in and the various options of which we should attack the problem. And so from the perspective of the government of Bermuda, nothing should be off the table. And if there are challenges in advancing our new industries with our existing banking partners, and there are new banking partners that wish to enter the market that the government can support, either through a digital bank or through other means, the government is going to do that. What is most important is recognizing that there are challenges that Bermuda has with banks. And that's not to say our local banks are bad, but our local banks are, as I've explained previously, understandably constrained with their ability to bank new industries. I accept it. I do not begrudge them for it. But that inability cannot hold the country back, especially when we're in a period of time where people are looking for jobs, growth, and opportunity. So our perspective is we are going to complete the build out of the business plan. We have an outline of that business plan. We're going to complete the outline of the business plan, but the objective is very clear: to offer something here in Bermuda where people and businesses, especially business in the digital asset space, cannot find anywhere else.
Okay. And just finally, I'd like to touch upon the sale of Ascendant. And do you think with the windfalls that some people are going to be receiving, the shareholders, what kind of impact that may have on the economy, something that you welcome, or are you worried that it may overheat? We had the Bank of Bermuda back in the 2000s when people put all their money into real estate.
I think the scale of the proceeds from the Bank of Bermuda sale to HSBC versus where we are with Ascendant are vastly different. From an economic perspective, I think at a press conference a few weeks ago, I think I may have mentioned a $200 million number. I'm encouraged by that. And I think that's partly a function of the times that we now live in. I've had an economy that has contracted as a result of the pandemic. And in as much as we're trying to get stimulus to create momentum in the economy that I don't have to borrow to support, I'm encouraging of it. So I'm expecting that there will be folks who get a windfall from this transaction who will use some of it to fund painting of the roof, replacement of the windows, doors, maybe a staycation because people may not want to travel, building a wall, shopping in town. So I'm hopeful that they will use a portion of the proceeds that can start to circulate in the economy and generate economic activity.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Right.
Any further questions?
Those questions. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you. That concludes our today's press conference.